record this so that anyone that joins later or anyone who wants to pop on our podcast link can have a listen later. So thank you so much for your time. We're very humbled to be able to undertake this second webinar, which we hope begins a series of development impact conversations. This is primarily focused on getting together evaluation, impact, and development practitioners and professionals with the aim of building critical mass thinkers and practitioners in the development sector to work collaboratively and create a shared value for the sector. So our guest presenter for today is Enala Mumba. Thank you, Enala, for joining us. We appreciate the fact that it's 6 a.m. in Rome and you're up very early, but thank you for that. A short bio was shared with all the registrants and participants on the flyer. Enala will tell you a little about herself, we'll allow her to introduce herself and her experience, and then she will proceed into her presentation. General housekeeping rules for this afternoon. We will let Enala present and then post her presentation. If you have any questions, please do pop them in the Q&A section. And Enala has the option, as she's co-host, to either answer them as she is presenting, or perhaps we can come back to them a little later on. But again, thank you so much for your time and welcome to the second webinar series of the Development Impact Conversations. And I will now give it over to Enala. Thank you.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Rosalia and the team, for allowing me to be here and be your guest speaker. It's always a pleasure to be around like-minded professionals and also to learn from each other. So I'm hoping it's not only me who will be talking, but through the chats and maybe the questions and comments, I'll also be getting something from the colleagues from your side. Let me see if I can turn on my video. Okay, looks like I cannot turn on my video. Is that okay if I proceed without the video? Because I think it's been locked from your side.
Our apologies, Enala. It's the bandwidth is a bit. Thank you. But okay. Please tell me when to launch the poll.
So you could actually start with the poll. Let's start with the poll. Okay, so I just wanted to find out from everybody if you have an experience, your experience, first of all, with M&E, and secondly, if you have ever worked in humanitarian responses. I just want to have a feel of who do we have in the room today, if I may put it that way. So you could go ahead and just pick an option from the screen and respond. Are people able to see the poll? I can see it from my side, but yes. I'm not seeing any movements.
I think they're responding now. So I've got choice 1, choice 3 on the first question. And on the second, at the moment, we've got, have you ever worked in emergency response? No. All the answers are no. Is your work solely focused on development programs? No. All the answers are no. And then with regards to the fourth question, it's 50-50. It's actually more yeses than nos for the fourth question. Are you able to see the responses, Enala?
Yeah, no, I can't see the responses, but I'm following what you're saying. So the last question, I didn't get the response.
For the last question, it's more yeses than nos. There's about 5 out of 7 people that said yes.
Oh, okay, good. All right, we could proceed. At least it's good to know. So then I can tell you a bit more stories about working in the humanitarian sector solely, especially the fast onset. Rosalia, just a logistical question. Are you going to be doing the slides, or I can just present them here so that I can move on now?
Please present on your end. Thank you.
Just a second. All right. If anybody has an issue seeing my screen or anything, just let me know. But from this end, I can see the screen. So I'm taking it, everyone is seeing it. So a little bit about myself. My name is Enala. I'm a Zambian national. And well, don't be scared when you hear the slide, when you see the slide saying my story. I'm not going to tell you my whole life story, but I'm just going to tell you the journey of my development and humanitarian work. So I started my work in the development sector in Zambia, but actually pre-Zambia, because I spent a couple of years in South Africa. So that's where I started. But my really structured development work with an international organization was in Zambia. And I worked there for 3 years. I started with an area development program that World Vision was running. And then I moved on to managing the regional M&E team, which was a big portfolio. I think put together, the portfolio that we had for grants and sponsorship programs was running almost around 35 million US dollars. And then I went on to South Sudan, which was just which was just coming from a post-conflict situation. So it was mostly emergency programs and grants. So I moved from a sort of steady development programming into fast onset, slow onset, rehabilitation, combined response. And South Sudan was such a huge program. We had over 35 grants that had to be managed all at the same time. And then after almost 2 years in South Sudan, I moved to Jordan at the beginning of the Syrian response. And I spent 2 years there supporting Syrian refugees within host communities in Jordan, but also providing support to other countries in the Middle East that were hosting Syrian refugees. So this included Iraq and Lebanon. After 2 years in Jordan, I moved on to Save the Children UK, where I was senior monitoring and evaluation advisor for the humanitarian program. So I was 100% SAGE staff. So I could support where what we call large-scale emergencies were happening around the world. It could be post-Ebola response in Sierra Leone. I went to do the child-focused post-Ebola assessment. Mozambique for the flood and drought response. So various kinds of responses I was covering in that role. And then I moved to Turkey to support the Turkey and Northwest Syria Office as Program Development and Quality Director, supporting the Syrian refugee response inside Turkey as well as northwest of Syria. And it was another interesting assignment because this was an emergency within an emergency, because it had been going on for some time. And then we always had something happening. Sometimes it would be your hospital has been bombed. Sometimes it could be an Aleppo evacuation happening. And after that, I moved to Rome with the Food and Agriculture Organization, and I was with them for 4 years. And I was with the Office of Emergency and Resilience, again, supporting emergency and resilience programs all around the world, wherever they needed my support. I continued primarily focusing on the Middle East, but I was also supporting Afghanistan. I supported the response in Myanmar. I was supporting Nigeria, the Maiduguri response, but I was based out of Rome. I just had to travel for missions or remotely support. And then last year, September, I decided to sort of take a little bit of a back stop from doing humanitarian emergencies and global development. And I joined IFAD. So IFAD is an international fund for agriculture development. And it's part of what are called the 3 Rome-based agencies. So there's FAO, there's WFP, and there's IFAD. These are the 3 UN agencies that have got a mandate to do with food security and the development of the food security sector and agriculture sector. They have different mandates, but they do collaborate a lot. And in this role, I'm mostly focusing on evaluating the countries that have received loans from IFAD, because we are an international funding institution. So we don't do development programming directly like other agencies do. We give loans to governments to develop their rural and agriculture sector. And so far, I seem to be stuck with upper middle income countries in terms of the evaluations I'm providing. I'm currently concluding one for Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I'm starting one on Montenegro. And I have, I'm supporting the corporate level evaluation on IFAD's contribution to nutrition. So in a nutshell, that's been a bit of my story between South Sudan and my coming to IFAD, which has been about 11, 12 years in total. I've been working in the humanitarian sector. And I will be giving you a little bit of what I learned in the process. But before, I'm just going to take a quick step back to look at why we're doing M&E. And I'm not going to bore you with so many details because, excuse me, I'm aware that in your last webinar, my colleague went through a very thorough and fantastic presentation on what M&E is, what we need to be aware of. So I'm just going to concentrate on certain parts which
Sorry, Enala, are you speaking? We cannot hear you.
Okay, yes, I was speaking. Let me see, maybe let me transfer to a speaker.
Thank you. You might want to say everything that was just said again. Thank you.
Oh. At what point did you stop hearing me?
I think we were good until maybe we can just go through this slide again, and I think we've the last speaker.
You can hear me now?
Yep, I can hear you now. Thank you.
If you can hear me, please put in the chat that you can hear me, because I'm not getting a response yet. Okay, thank you. So anyway, I will not go over, what I started with was an introduction of how I got into the time I've spent in the humanitarian sector, but you had the slide before. In a nutshell, I've spent the last 12 years doing humanitarian programming, primarily in the Middle East, a little bit of scattered support to Asia, support in Africa, and in the different large-scale emergencies. But from September last year, I joined IFAD, and I've been concentrating on the development sector, and more specifically because we are a funding institution, we are giving loans to governments, and I support to evaluate those loans that we give out to see if the performance has been up to par. So a little bit of a change, but an interesting one. And then I wanted just to take a little step back on why we're doing M&E, but I'll not go so much into details, because from the last development impact seminar series you had, there was so much focus on what is M&E, what is it meant to do. So I'll not go into those details, but I'm just doing this to set a foundation of what is going to be the concentration of our discussion this afternoon. So the reason for doing M&E, of course, we must be accountable. I know there are people who say, first of all, it's learning, but we're saying the reason for doing M&E, first of all, we have to be accountable. Did we do what we said we were going to do? We received funds, in most cases, taxpayers' funds coming from different governments. Has it been used correctly? Have we achieved what we set out to achieve with those funds? And then comes the learning. Did we achieve what we meant to achieve? How did we achieve it? If not, why? And what can we learn from that process? And so we also have to think about M&E as a public good, because if you've been in the development sector for some time, you know that there are people who sort of are questioning whether the development sector is actually doing the right thing. Because after so many years, we still have poverty levels very high. We still have high indebted and poor countries at the same time. But evaluation helps us to do development programming better and to keep these conversations going so that there's transparency. And one of the things I like about monitoring is being able to contribute to changes in real time. Because if something is not going in the right course, you can raise a flag and management makes a decision instead of waiting until the end when it's a little bit too late. Another reason that often we don't think about as M&E professionals is that M&E is supposed to help management tell the story better of how the change came about. In the previous years, M&E was seen more as a policing, department, but really M&E is there to help tell the story of what you've done and how you've done it better. And if it didn't work, what could be learned? So your M&E people are supposed to be your allies. And okay, so I'll go on to talk about what makes a functional M&E system. Like I said, I'm laying the foundation before I talk about my personal experiences that we could learn from. So it doesn't matter whether you're in a development sector or you're in a humanitarian sector. If you want to have a good and functional M&E, it starts by having good indicators. You need to have indicators that are measurable, all of that, indicators that are appropriate to context, indicators that help help link the cause and effect in terms of what you've been doing and what you're expecting very well. But also it's not just indicators. Indicators are supposed to be framed under a proper strategy for what you're going to do for either the country office, for the area development, or for the response in general. And so you need to have very good indicators that are going to help tell the story better. In World Vision, when we first started talking about child well-being, measuring child well-being indicators, I had the privilege of working alongside Global Center to do the first measurement of child well-being indicators, and would go in the communities, and some of the ways to simplify the understanding of what an indicator was we could ask communities to say, when a child is doing very well in this community, how does that look like? And you could get interesting responses. Some people would even say things like the child eats 3 times a day. And some of these people were people who are not even educated, but they knew what was good. So you could translate that into an indicator because a basic person knows what the problem is and what they expect the response to be. So when I talk about indicators, don't just think about it in a very complicated manner, but ask yourself, if we have done this work very good, how will it look like? And then, of course, you need to have a good data collection and analysis system, because this is where everything happens. This is the evidence base of what we have. And of course, we need to have very good review and feedback mechanism, not just from your M&E people. And I'm going to talk about this later. Excuse me, when we talk about project management people and even the community. And you also need to have the right staffing. M&E seems to be
Hi, Enala. Sorry. Just wanted to say that I'm unable to hear you.
different donors, and sometimes the coordination among donors isn't so very well, and then you find that you are understaffed because all of a sudden you have a program for which the skill set of the current office is not well matched to. Hence, you end up wanting to have SAGE support or hire new skills in the country office to come and support. Okay. So I wanted to find out from people who are here, and you can just write in the chat. For those of you who have had any experience with humanitarian operations, or even in your development program, if you have had any challenges that pertain to M&E, as I'm talking, I'd want to see what some of those are in the chat. So now let me talk about my own learning curve when it came to emergency programming. I realized much as I knew what I was supposed to do in M&D in a development context. It was a total different complex when you go to emergency for the reasons that I mentioned before. And the reason I am putting this graph here is because whenever you have to shift from development to humanitarian programming, whether it's in the office where you have a mix of people who have experience in humanitarian operations or those who don't, be aware that the office is going to be going through a learning cave. And so the demands that you're going to be getting on you from your regional offices, from your global center, or from your HQ is going to be huge, but be aware of the learning cave. So what did the learning cave look like for me? And first of all, and I'm going to go into a lot of details for each one of these, but I just want to start from a general perspective was, I was coming from a place where you had one strategy for the country office. Everything is well aligned. You know where you're doing, where you're going and what needs to be happening. You have sponsorship programming and you have like one big grant. And all of a sudden to be thrown in a context where you have to be responsible for 35 grants, which have got different timelines, are in different locations, log firms that don't speak to each other. You have multiple donor requirements, high staff turnover and high burnout of staff because of the varied work that you have, and a really high stress environment. So what did I learn having to navigate that learning cave that I talked about? And first of all, in talking about various projects, various timelines, locations, and law firms, it's very important that we are very honest with ourselves as development practitioners to say, what do I know and what don't I know? Be very aware of that. And then you can start making steps towards doing your job very well, because you can always now have a platform to negotiate either with your supervisor or with the offices that are supporting you to say, you know, we are very good at A, B, C, D, and E, but not very good at this, which you are asking us to do. And so if we have to go through this, like, what kind of support are we going to get? And also understanding the status quo. I'll give you an example. When I went to the Syria response for the first time in Jordan, the response had already been running for like 3 to 4 months. And so I found log firms had already been developed, things had already been done, but they were not very strategic because people were just coming in, they support for 1 month and then they go, and then I was supposed to be there long term. And so it was very important to sort of do my own audit, say, what have I found? What are the indicators like? What is working? What's not working? What tools are available? And then I do my own, what I'll call, quote unquote, an inception report and present it to management. This is the status quo I found. And for me to be able to do my job very well, this is what I need. And this is what the donor requirements are. How are we going to get support? So it's very important to understand the status quo and then be able to plan how you're going to do that job. And in case of a very senior role, you can even ask for a peer review to happen. This happens a lot in the UN agencies, but even in INGOs, we used to do that, even in Save the Children International. And then based on that, you can communicate your plan and the timelines and resources that you need, because sometimes people who might be designing your programs might be excited about an indicator that they learned about, but they don't know that it is very costly or it is even a burden on the community to measure that indicator. So you have to make sure that understand what's happening before people come to you and say, oh, but this indicator is due, or this evaluation is due, this baseline is due. Give yourself enough time to understand the status quo so that you can know your your course of action to take. And then in terms of navigating multiple donors, so after you do your status quo check, you need to ask yourself, the major donors that we have, what are their M&E priorities? What are their key indicators? For instance, ECHO, if at all they're funding you to do anything with WASH, anything to do with food security, they are going to have certain indicators that are non-negotiable. Or they may even want to have your monitoring visits. You have USAID on the other side, and you have your, your bilateral donors as well. So find out what those priorities are and see how they fit into your strategy and your country. Ask yourself, what are all these donors requiring in this area of, this area of the country that I'm going to be doing a baseline, and do all of them at the same time. So it helps
reduce the amount of fatigue on your beneficiaries, but at the same time, it also helps you to just do one job and do it once at a time, other than having to go back several times. And it allows you to be able to spend less on that type of exercise. And then, so with donors, sometimes they are very skeptical that if you lump all the measurement into one, you may end up not giving them the indicators that they want or not measuring this very well. But you have to show how your plan is going to work, but more so how that doing that at a large scale is going to help you communicate the findings widely. I mean, widely, not only to the one donor, but even to the community. If in the development sector, you also have some clusters, but in the humanitarian sector, it is more pronounced because they have to be triggered the moment a response has been declared. Okay, so how do you navigate high staff turnover? Like I mentioned, emergencies are usually high stress, so people don't stay for long. If you stay for 2 years, you are done. 2 years in an emergency feels like 5 years. And so you need to anticipate, first of all, when you go into response, what are the human resource needs that you start? And I'm talking this from a point of you are leading a department. Like I was leading the M&E department, or I was leading the program development and quality departments. And so what are the human resource needs that you need at the start? And ask for funding for that. What is the structure that you require to be able to deliver short and long term? And because if you are not bringing these conversations at the table, people will have unrealistic expectations of what you can deliver. But the moment you put this there, then they know how to think about the programming and what kind of funding can be made available for delivery. And so think about investing in national capacity. And an example I will give, when I first started with Save the Children UK at Surge Capacity, I had a chat with my boss who previously had been a Surge personnel as well. And when I was asking him about tips to do very well in the job, he was like, don't be like other humanitarians who are so good at what they do. They go into an operation, they do the job, everyone is so happy about what they have done, but when they go, nobody knows what they did, nobody knows how to do it, and nobody can do anything. And so the response is back to where it was, but even worse, because they spend so much money to have this person in country, and when that person has gone, nobody can take over. And so it's very important to invest in national capacity. So I learned to be very intentional, hire national officers, because in many countries, like when I was in tech, you have very brilliant minds. They have got master's degrees and things like that, but they did not have experience in emergencies. So you hire and then have a learning program. You can get search support from your support officers or other experts that you bring in, consultants, but it should be that you have a clear plan of how they're going to capacitate your national staff so that once they are gone, it is more sustainable to maintain national staff doing the jobs. And then I also learned that you need to plan your succession. I think it's just, it's not a surprise that if you're working in a country which is not your national, chances are you're going to leave at some point. So anticipate your departure and plan who's going to do the role that you do. Is it going to be done by one person? Is it going to be divided into two persons? And how do you make sure that the people that you currently have can be able to do that so that when you go, it's not a good indictment that when you go, people are praising you to that you were so good, now the program cannot manage. No, a sign of success should be that you were here, you left, and the work is going on because you trained other people to do the job equally as good. And then the high stress environment, this one happens even in a development sector, I must say. I'm sure many of you can attest to this. I think from a management perspective, if you, oh, by the way, I need to mention that I have a toddler in the house and I think he's just waking up. So please don't mind when you hear him coming out to call me. It's fine. The visitor is around. He'll go to play, but I'm sure he's going to come in for a bit just to say hello to Mama. Yeah. Just a second. Okay. So this is working in the 21st century and working from home joys. Yeah. So I was talking about managing a high stress environment. And I was saying what is important, what I learned was important is you need to acknowledge that staff are in a high stress environment. You need to acknowledge that the hours spent in are high and show empathy to your staff. And in an emergency, one of the things I learned was the fact that sometimes it's not just you are saving the affected population, even staff are affected. If an earthquake has happened or a town where you're coming from has been blown up, even staff are worried about their parents, they are worried about their children that they left behind. So it's very important that you acknowledge that, but not only acknowledge that, set the right tone as a manager. And one of those things I do even up to now is I don't send emails after time. If I have to send emails, I'll put a delay timer so that the email only goes in the morning. Because if you're saying that it's not important for them to read it, then don't send it out. So, Bhumi, come. So I found that it was important to make sure that you set the right tone as management when it comes to, and talking about work-life balance. You can hear my toddler was making noise, but he just woke up. So good morning. Say good morning. Good morning. Okay, now Mama can continue presenting. Okay. So I was talking about making sure that you not only acknowledge, but lead by example. And one of the things that many organizations are learning to do very well is to actually have professional services for staff who are in humanitarian responses. So we have to be aware of that and make sure that staff have got the support that they need. Okay, let me move a little bit quickly. Okay, so I'll give you an example of, so in such an environment, how can you perform so that you are actually winning, or so that you can actually deliver? Okay, so I'm going to talk about trends over the years. So basically, what we're talking about here is you need to be able to read what is happening in terms of the M&D sector over time. And one of those aspects to start with is technology. Technology has over time changed how we're doing data collection, analyzing, and reporting. When I first started, we were doing our surveys on pen and paper. I remember when we were doing the LQ survey, we would actually have pencils, to go through the to go through the surveys. But then it was not long before mobile technology came for us to be doing data collection using mobile phones and using tablets. So you have to keep up with the trends. And also the use of GIS and having spatial analysis. This just enhances the level of analysis that you can provide, and the presentation of information. And the mainstreaming themes. These days, almost all your donors, including the organizations that we are working for, are constantly asking, are you providing gender disaggregated data? But not just that, but also asking that your M&E looks at issues of intersectionality, issues of how an in-depth analysis of gender, youth, and disability, or even indigenous peoples. So you have to make sure that these key aspects of the changing landscape in evaluation are included in your M&E, and it can improve the outlook of your reports, the outlook of your relationship with the donors as well, because you're giving them information that they know is available out there. And I'll just give a short example of how IFAD is using ICT in evaluation. Of course, it's all in these aspects of using big data analytics, machine learning, but I want to zero in on the principles for use of ICT in evaluation or M&D, and that is, it must be people-centric. We should not just be driven because the technology is nice, the technology is new, but it should be, how does it help me deliver better to people? How does it include everybody who needs to be the subject of M&E in this? And also making sure that we are protecting the privacy of the beneficiaries or the people that we are studying. And then a main aspect I'm going to talk about is communicating results. Oftentimes, M&E people, we tend to be so taken with the long processes that we are doing, the baselines are long. Sorry, let me just go back. The baselines are long, the evaluations are long. We forget to communicate the results. And though it might be my technical role to be able to read 60 pages of a technical report in one day and provide feedback, other people who are not M&E, that's not interesting to them. So I need to do an audience analysis. Who's my audience? So my audience is the country director, or my audience is the operations director. They don't have time to read a 60-page report. How do I synthesize it in such a way that they can have 4 pages to read and know what is supposed to happen, know what are the key issues, and what am I asking them to do? So you need to do this using engaging conversations, and I'll give an example of that. And in IFAD now, we've been talking a lot about using brain science to communicate evaluation findings. So the basic underlying thinking about brain science in evaluation is the fact that when you are talking to people, the psychology involved, and when people think you're going to be delivering messages that are going to ask them to change a behavior or to change a way of doing things, or even passing judgment on their work, they immediately get into a very defensive mode. And when you are talking, they are only thinking of how to defend. So you need to know how to engage when that is the type of context you are working with. And of course, does that mean then you should just be, not doing your work or saying things as they are? You should, but it means that you need to show empathy for the evaluant. Have a respect for the work that they do, have a respect for the challenges that they face, so that even when you give your judgment on the work that has been done, especially evaluation, you do give judgment. Did something work or not? You have to say something, but it should be done in a way that is empathetic, so that people can receive your message. And we have a VAC, we have a VAC table there. This just shows you that when you're delivering communication messages, some people are good at read and writing, but other people learn by hearing, other people learn by seeing, and other people by kinesthetic, meaning there should be a little bit of movement. So whenever you're presenting your results, think about how you're going to cater to your audience who have got different learning or ways of absorbing information. And I'll give an example of how you can do stakeholder engagement. This one can be as cheap or as expensive as you want it to be. But let me give an example of you having conducted a baseline survey, or you have conducted a post-distribution monitoring. It could be any M&E product that you have on the table. Once the findings are done, so you bring your stakeholders, or even in a cluster platform where you have to present, or even to your government counterparts. So usually we start by presenting the findings. Someone has got a PowerPoint presentation like the way I'm doing. You talk about what your survey had found. But after your presentation and people ask questions, we now go into group work. So you will have prepared your graphs, you have prepared your slides that they'll be looking at based on what you were presenting, and maybe in groups of 4 and 6. You can divide them either according to the section of your survey. Maybe let's say these people are concentrating on WASH, these people that we received were bad. Sometimes, unfortunately, does happen. The question is, what are you going to do about that so that there can be a resulting action? So this is an example, and this can just take 1 hour, 30 minutes, or it can take 12. If you have a lot of stakeholders and a lot to discuss, it can even take a day. So you can play around the most engaging way to do it. But the bottom line is people must be around the table, discuss, and not just see a presentation and end it. No, you have to engage them and hear their voices. And this also happens to work as of the validation process. So how do you message the audience? Like I mentioned, in terms of thinking of brain science and evaluation, I mean, with almost a combative attitude. And then, so when you know that, avoid using words such as failure. Let's say the project failed. No, you only use such strong terms if you want to draw a particular attention to a certain weakness that can be posed as an opportunity. Does that mean you cannot call out failure? No, no, no. You can when something has been negative, but you need to provide some nuanced analysis for why findings are so negative. Because sometimes as evaluators and M&E, we thought being objective just meant you should say it the way you want to say it. If it's not good, it's not good. But then we realize that doesn't help achieve anything. You have to be a little bit more smart about how you are communicating your findings. And I've already talked about accountability, but we also learn to say that our messages need to be constructive, but not too sanitized that it loses its credibility. So in the UN, usually you learn to be a bit more diplomatic in how you're presenting messages because you don't want to upset government, some things like that. But you really learn that much as you have to be diplomatic in the messages, don't compromise the message, because then if we do that, we are compromising the fact that we should be bringing accountability to the table. And also we can be empathetic, but not impartial. We still have to remain neutral. So I want to give an example of closing the loop in terms of when an evaluation has happened or baseline has happened. And this happens whether it's for the humanitarian sector or the development sector. So I'll give an example of IFAD. So IFAD at corporate level, when we do an evaluation, there's going to be a management response. And I know many of your organizations do this as well. But the way IFAD has done it, and I know other organizations have done this also, they have it, they post the status of implementation of the recommendations online, and IFAD does that. So this is an example of the president's report. It actually goes all the way to the president of the organization to say how the evaluation recommendations are being implemented. So this is high level, but even at a country level, the country director can be the one that is championing to make sure that the evaluation recommendations or the M&D recommendations that have come from the activities you were doing are being implemented. And of course, this helps to ensure that there's actually learning, because if it's not happening, then how are we learning from evaluation? There's a lot of money in evaluations and monitoring, so we might as well make sure that it works. And then the last mile for closing the loop on beneficiaries is to make sure that we forget this constituency of evaluation. The reports that we have them only because beneficiaries provided information, but we don't plan for doing it, and we don't have the right tools or the right skills for it. But once you plan, it doesn't matter whether or not, you find a way of presenting not only palatable, but in a way that it is going to help them understand the concepts you're talking about. No technical area is too big for a community to understand. If you think it is too hard for them to understand, it's because messaging is not on point. It's because your messaging is too it's not been broken down to the level where your audience can be able to get it in bite-sized chunks. So this is where the audience analysis is. Your beneficiaries may be PowerPoint, you may need chat paper, you may need a different way of delivering the message. But we have a responsibility as part of accountability to affected populations to make sure that the information we collect about beneficiaries goes back to beneficiaries. Okay. And I will not take so much time on this. One of the things I think which was a bit of a learning case for me was realizing if you are in, and this is not only for M&E, by the way, it happens in different you work as an advisor, but you're not the one making decisions. So sometimes that can to the table. But to be able to do that, make sure that you are having the right person in the M&E role. That means hire at the right level. Sometimes you hire too low because your budget is low, and then you don't get the right person. The person is just not delivering. What you're requiring of them is beyond their level of competency. And in terms of the role, make sure that the role of M&E is beyond compliance, but it's actually adding value. That way, when management knows that the person we have providing M&E support to us brings value, they will be able to listen. Even if you are not the one making the decision, they'll have respect for the role. And as well, don't just look at what is happening inward in your organization. As M&E, you have to look at what's happening outward, not only M&E as technical experts, so that when you say, look, the agency next door is doing this, or the other organization has been able to pull off this successful innovation, how does that help us in what we're trying to do? I'll skip this slide because it just talks about the norms and standards to follow for M&E, which are very important. But this, you can always find this online, and I have a slide that talks about resources. I'm now about to finish, and in finishing my presentation, I'll just talk a little bit about the evaluation function at IFAD and how that helps to be able to do the work. So there's an evaluation manual that IFAD follows to be able to guide the work that we do, and this is free online. You can get it. We have it in 4 languages. So to make sure that we are, because we are an independent evaluation function, so what that means is we don't report to management, we report to the board. That is to make sure that we have a voice that is independent and we're not fearing retaliation or anything like that. And sometimes people have thought being an independent evaluator means that you hire a consultant. No, in IFAD, the concept we have is all evaluations are staff-led. Yes, I will hire senior consultants to help me sometimes on the evaluation. For instance, the evaluation I was doing for Bosnia and Herzegovina was a value chain based program, and I don't have expertise in value chain, so I hire a consultant to help me in value chain analysis. But ultimately, I'm the one responsible for that evaluation. So this goes back to what I was talking about in terms of building capacity in your national staff. How do you make sure that your staff can be able to lead this type of exercises? I've talked about the manual and making sure that there's a policy to protect your staff in place. And also we use a 6-point rating system. So sometimes this can be a bit controversial, but every time we do an evaluation on all the evaluation criteria that we have, we are going to say whether, so it's a 6-point scale from the highest being highly satisfactory to the lowest being unsatisfactory. And so this brings a lot of conversations, because sometimes you rate people a 4, moderately satisfactory, and they'll say, but why? So you have to provide evidence for why you're saying something is at that rating. Yeah. And lastly, IFAD in M&E really believes in strategic communication. So I'm sure Rosalia will be very happy about this. But also it just goes to show the importance of making sure that we engage in a wider audience to communicate our findings. We have newsletters that go out, we have coffee talks, we have different talk series, we have a YouTube channel, and I'm encouraging you to go there. I talked about brain science for evaluation. We have a whole 1-hour discussion with a neuro expert and brain science expert who talks about how you can communicate your findings. And we have different news items that we go to. So this is just an example of how you can communicate your M&E findings. It could be your other technical area, but you should have a strategy for how you can communicate. I'm not talking about the key takeaways because we've already kind of discussed that. And I'll make this presentation available. It has got some useful links for some of the things that I talked about. So thank you very much. I'll stop here in case there are any questions.
All right, thank you so much, Enala. I'm just going to check. If there's anybody that has any questions, you can pop it in the Q&A.
Over to you.
Thank you. Enala, can you hear me? I'm not sure if you're able to hear me. Can Can anyone hear
I
me?
can see, I think Terry, your hand is up. Terry, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Let me allow Terry to. Sorry, Enala, can you hear me?
Terry, are you there?
Hi, Nancy, can you hear me? If you can hear me, can you raise your hand? Okay,
Let me
thank you.
check the Q&A. Hi, Rosalia. Okay, I can see that the hand raised from Nancy and Terry. I think any one of them can just unmute and make their contribution or their question. No, Rosalia, for some reason I can't hear you.
Technical difficulties.
Okay. Yeah, I think there could be technical difficulties from your side, but I can see the raised hands, but I can't hear anyone. I'm trying to look at the participant chart because usually it should be able to show if someone is talking. I can't hear. Yes, Rosalia, you can go ahead. You can go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. So
I'll also try and join from my mobile device just in case I might be able to hear you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to give a quick rundown, a summary of what Enala's presentation entailed. So following her introduction of her extensive experience in humanitarian work in M&E, she spoke about why M&E is important and gave 5 aspects. Furthermore, she also spoke about the functionality of M&E, especially in humanitarian responses. And I think she mentioned one thing which is really good, which is just be honest with yourself and know what your limitations are. And also understanding the status quo if you're coming into a new M&E role and what's required, especially for those in the development sector. We appreciate those that are not in the development sector who have joined the webinar, but for those in the development sector, I suppose in navigating multiple donors or stakeholders, and it's important to understand the status quo and your deliverables and resources and ensure that these expectations are communicated to ensure that everyone is aware of them. And also, she spoke about staffing. So anticipate your departure. We're not going to be, usually you develop in a role and then you move on. So be intentional about investing in talent and building the capacity of that local talent. And also, Enala spoke about the need to understand M&E trends and be aware that partners and donors that have an increased need for disaggregated data now. And also embrace ICT and how it can enhance your work. But I think she made a reference to VARK, V-A-R-K, which is quite interesting, and I really like that, being in the communications sphere myself, and particularly the importance of communicating your M&E findings to stakeholders in a, she used the word palatable, packaging it in a palatable message where beneficiaries can understand, but also those stakeholders that you're engaging with.
Okay, sorry, Rosalia, I'm able to hear you now from my mobile device. I don't know what's happening from the laptop. I couldn't hear you.
Okay, thanks so much, Nala. So I just gave a brief rundown of the presentation and just some summary points of what you spoke about and alluded to. Very extensive experience in humanitarian disasters. And I think here we are very much prone in this country to natural disasters, which require a need for a humanitarian response. And a lot of these learnings can be applicable in that sense, where you're evaluating a disaster response in that sector. So thank you so much. We appreciate that you have been awake since very early hours, maybe even 5 o'clock this morning in Rome. And we thank everybody who's made their time available. What I will do here on is have a copy of Enala's presentation available. And if anybody has any questions, we do apologize for the technical difficulties that we're having. We've been having internet issues since, I think, the beginning of this week. So I will make it available on the podcast channel. At the moment, it's only audio and presentations, but we will ensure that we try to get some video in when we can have the bandwidth for it here in PNG. But I think thank you very much, everyone. If there's any questions, please feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to share them with Enala. If not, her email address is available. And I think, Enala, did you want to run through the Mentimeter?
Yeah, I'm wondering if people can manage to get to Mentimeter. So if you have your mobile phone, the easiest is just to scan the QR code that's on the screen, and then it will take you to the Mentimeter. Or you can just put on your mobile phone or your webinar, or your web page to say Mentimeter, and then this is the code. Once you enter the code, it will bring the question, and the question is just what was your takeaway from today's, and then we can do a word cloud that we can share when you share the presentation. But people if they do it now, I can even get to the website and share the see how it all comes out if people are able to go there.
Sure. Thank you so much. We'll see. Well, hopefully we'll have some people be able to pop on. At the moment, because I'm hosting, I might not be able to. But please feel free to jump on the Mentimeter link, and we would love to hear about your experience and your takeaways from this session. I think apart from that, again, thank you so much, Enala, for your time. And thank you to all the registrants for joining us again for the second webinar. We're leading up to the third webinar, which will be in October, towards the end of October. So for those that are particularly interested, please do feel free when you see the invite from me to socialize in your respective circles. But hop on the Mentimeter if you're able to. And I'll see if Enala and I can get that link also included in the takeaways, also on that link of the podcast link to share with everybody. Enala, did you want to add something?
No, thank you. Just thank you, and all the best to you guys. And yeah, hope to. I'll be sharing this, and if anyone has questions, for sure they can get in touch, or any other resources they want. We have a lot of free resources, including online trainings on the IOE website for IFAD. So happy to discuss some of those. Yeah, but I've put most of the links in the presentation as well.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance this afternoon. Thank you, Enala. You have a lovely day ahead. And all of my colleagues here in PNG and friends, please have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you. Have a lovely afternoon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.